We have strict statutes and most biting laws, the needful bits and curbs to headstrong weeds, which for this 14 years we have let slip. In Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, the Duke observes that when laws are not enforced, the threat of punishment becomes a mockery and decorum is lost. From 1980 to 2008, American policy shifted toward harsher treatment. The incarceration rate quadrupled, reaching roughly 1 in every 100 adults behind bars. This period serves as a large-scale test for a central question in law and economics. Does the expected cost of punishment govern criminal behavior in the same way price governs the demand for a consumer good? The price of an offense is expected punishment, probability of capture, multiplied by severity. An individual offends only when private benefits exceed this expected punishment plus moral costs. Deterrence is measured by supply elasticity. A large negative elasticity means higher costs significantly decrease crime. However, the model is sensitive to risk preferences. A risk-averse person is deterred more by the certainty of being caught, while a risk-preferring individual may be less affected by the severity of the eventual sentence. If offenders are risk-preferring or prioritize immediate outcomes, prioritizing prison construction over police patrols is a fundamental miscalculation in resource allocation. Moving from theoretical equations to empirical data requires identifying moments where we can isolate the actual impact of a punishment. Early studies, like Isaac Ehrlich's 1973 analysis of robbery, found higher conviction probabilities correlated with lower crime rates. However, these cross-sectional studies are vulnerable to confounding variables between jurisdictions. When Ann Whitty tracked released convicts, data suggested conviction probability was a more reliable deterrent for property crimes than sentence length. Notably, the deterrent effect was weakest among drug addicts. To find clearer evidence, economists look for natural experiments where the law changes for some people but not others. In 2006, the Italian parliament released thousands of inmates under a clemency bill. The bill included a unique condition. If a released prisoner committed a new crime within 5 years, their remaining suspended sentence would be added to their new one. This created a randomized variation in the cost of future crime. Researchers calculated an elasticity of approximately -0.74, suggesting that a 10% increase in the sentence length led to a 7.4% drop in recidivism. Data confirms deterrence is a real phenomenon, but its strength depends heavily on the specific mechanism of the penalty and the type of offender involved. The standard model assumes offenders are forward-looking. In reality, many violent crimes are committed by young men who are impulsive and focused almost entirely on the present. This chart uses a regression-discontinuity design to look at what happens on an offender's 18th birthday, when they are suddenly subject to adult sentencing instead of juvenile penalties. Despite the sudden jump in legal severity, the offending rate does not change. Young offenders do not appear to incorporate the threat of longer adult sentences into their immediate choices. For a law to deter, the person must know the rule, think of it at the moment of the crime, and perceive the costs as outweighing the benefits. Surveys suggest most offenders do not know the specific sanctions they face, and the aggregate chance of being convicted for most crimes is very low. We also observe duration neglect. Prisoners tend to adapt to their surroundings within months, and their memory of the punishment's unpleasantness doesn't scale linearly with the length of their stay. Adding 5 years to a 10-year sentence may provide very little additional deterrent. These findings suggest that if the goal is to reduce crime, shifting resources away from long prison terms and toward increasing the certainty of arrest may be more effective. Locking people up only reduces crime through incapacitation if the offender is not immediately replaced. In markets for illegal goods, like drugs, arresting one dealer often just opens a spot for a competitor. To separate the effect of prison from the law, we look at California's Proposition 8. It added sentence enhancements for certain repeat crimes. Researchers saw an immediate drop in those crimes before any of the offenders had actually served the extra time, suggesting a deterrent effect. Choosing where to set the threshold for conviction is a balance between two errors: the Type 1 error of convicting the innocent and the Type 2 error of acquitting the guilty. When society places a high moral cost on punishing the innocent, the efficient choice is to move the threshold toward protecting the accused. In this way, economic efficiency aligns with the principles of retributive justice. With the cost of housing a single prisoner reaching approximately $50,000 per year, the U.S. system faces diminishing marginal returns. The elasticity of crime with respect to incarceration is low, roughly negative 0.15, compared to the higher returns seen from spending on police. Economics suggests that monetary fines can be a more efficient deterrent than prison. While incarceration is a high-cost destruction of human capital, a fine is a transfer. An optimal fine equal to the harm divided by the probability its apprehension can restore deterrence without the overhead of the prison system. The American crime strategy of the late 20th century emphasized severity over certainty. The result was a system that purchased relatively small reductions in crime at a very high fiscal and social cost. Identification problems become more pronounced at the frontiers of criminal justice, where data is often used to support existing ideological positions. The debate over the death penalty reached a height when Ehrlich's models claimed that one execution prevents 7 to 8 homicides. This ignores the jury's reaction. If jurors are more reluctant to convict when the death penalty is on the table, the probability of punishment drops, which can actually increase the crime rate. This endogeneity makes a clear causal link difficult to prove. Furthermore, when comparing death penalty states to non-death penalty states or countries like Canada, we see homicide rates moving together, suggesting no unique deterrent effect from executions. Illegal drug markets also behave according to their specific demand curves. A non-addict has elastic demand. If the price goes up, they use less. But an addict has inelastic demand. When interdiction raises the price of drugs, an addict's total expenditure increases. Because they cannot simply stop, they are often driven to commit more property crimes to fund the higher cost of their addiction. We face a simultaneity problem with guns. Do more guns in the hands of citizens deter criminals, or does a high crime rate cause more citizens to arm themselves? Because both of these realities can be true at once, it is difficult for researchers to isolate which direction the causality moves. In both drug and gun markets, policies that fail to account for these equilibrium dynamics can lead to results that are the exact opposite of what was intended. Between 1991 and 2001, serious crime in the United States dropped by nearly 40%. This shift allows us to test these theories against a massive historical change. In his decomposition of the crime drop, Stephen Levitt examined the data and discarded several popular explanations. He found that the strong economy, new gun control laws, and the use of capital punishment were not the primary drivers of the decline. The measurable causes included a significant increase in the number of police officers and the natural receding of the crack cocaine epidemic, which had previously driven high levels of systemic violence. Increased incarceration accounted for roughly 1/3 of the drop. Stephen Levitt also famously proposed that the 1973 legalization of abortion reduced the number of children born into high-risk environments, contributing to a lower crime rate 2 decades later. Other researchers argue that when you look at specific age groups, that correlation between abortion and crime rates disappears. This debate serves as a reminder of how fragile economic findings can be when they rely on highly specific data sets. We return to the offender's choice, but the model is now much more complex. We must account for the fact that people are often short-sighted, ill-informed, and subject to changing psychological states. Economic theory provides a framework for understanding human behavior, identifying the likely points of friction in our legal system. However, it is only through empirical identification that we can separate effective policy from costly intuition.